I'd never really intended on playing Hellblade. I saw it on YouTube and Twitter, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty, but it never really compelled me to pick it up. And so I didn't for years. And then I heard that there's virtual reality support on PCs, so I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm a massive VR nerd. Let me go play this in VR. And then I didn't play it in VR, but I did play through it. And Senua's Sacrifice is possibly the most compelling game that I've ever played, with a combination of brilliant performances and gameplay mechanics that are integrated into the narrative so well that I would argue it's the best example of ludonarrative harmony that any of us could ever come up with. Just a little heads up before we get started, there's a lot of graphic imagery in this game, a lot of corpses and body horror. We're also going to be talking about mental health issues, because it's not an easy game to play through, and by extension it's not an easy game to talk about. On a lighter note though, I am giving away a copy of this game to celebrate hitting 100 subscribers, so if you want to experience Hellblade for yourself, subscribe and comment below, and I'll be drawing a winner on August 4th. Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, follows titular Senua on her journey to rescue her lover's soul from Helheim. It's a pretty simple premise. I think people are familiar with this sort of story, but Senua is very, very heavily implied to have schizophrenia or be experiencing psychosis, and that makes this game significantly more interesting, but also a lot more difficult to play through. She carries a full ensemble of voices in her head. Some of them are her own, but there's also the voice of her lost lover, as well as her mother, who is also implied to be schizophrenic, and a Norse slave who she befriended before she started this journey, and he does a lot of exposition and storytelling to get the user into the world, and that of the darkness. And the darkness is the manifestation of Senua's sickness. It takes many forms. It's a lot to take in. The voices often speak over each other and provide an overwhelming stimulus to Senua and also by extension the player. And it never feels tacked on. Because Senua's schizophrenia isn't just a plot point, it's also integral to the gameplay. And that's why I was saying that this is a brilliant example of ludonarrative harmony. I should probably explain what ludonarrative harmony and dissonance is, because it's really important when talking about Hellblade. So, ludonarrative harmony / dissonance refers to the connection between the story of a game and the gameplay mechanics of a game. For example, if your main character talks a lot about wanting to save the world and not wanting to hurt people, but then the gameplay forces you to kill a bunch of people, that would be an example of ludonarrative dissonance. There's a disconnect between the story that you're being told and the gameplay where you, the player, have control. I want to clarify here that ludonarrative dissonance is not strictly a bad thing. It can be used to make the player uncomfortable with their actions or to paint a character as a hypocrite, and that's a really powerful form of storytelling only video games can really do. On the flip side of that would be ludonarrative harmony, where there is a synchrony between the two elements. Hellblade's ludonarrative harmony stems from Senua's experiences with psychosis and schizophrenia, her uncertainty in what is and isn't real. From the opening moments of the game where she hears Dillion, her lover's disembodied head, breathing while it's strapped to her waist, the developers of Ninja Theory constantly bring into question what is and isn't real. It leads the player to wonder if the supernatural entities that you face as Senua, which is a very literal interpretation of facing one's demons, are all in her head, from looking through portals that warp and change the world around you to looking for runes that are cast in shadows and silhouettes. Hellblade is drowning in mysticism and magic from Norse mythology. But ultimately, whether it's real or not doesn't actually matter. Regardless of how real it is, Senua is experiencing those things anyway. Her internal and external horrors are so intense and so real that Senua can't differentiate between the two, and by extension, neither can the player. Senua's experience with psychosis is integral to the gameplay of Hellblade. This doubt played quite heavily on me in my first playthrough when I first found Surt's realm, the god of fire and the bringer of Ragnarok. Senua is wandering through a scorched forest and comes across a burnt effigy. When you touch it, the forest is suddenly in flames again, and Senua is forced to escape before becoming as ashen as the trees around her. Thinking that it was a trick or illusion, I took the most direct path to the exit, which was directly through the flames, only to see, moments later, Senua falling to the ground, crying in agony as the flames engulfed her body. Moments like this are contrasted with puzzles where a doorway would appear where previously was not after turning a corner or looking through a gateway. And that uncertainty of what is reality makes the game challenging and engaging. If you couldn't already tell from what you've seen in this video, Hellblade's visual presentation is immaculate. The game is dripping in atmosphere so intensely that reminds me a lot of playing through Shadow of the Colossus for the first time. One of the most interesting parts of the game's presentation is how Senua's darkness is represented, whether you feel it's an analogy for fear or anxiety or depression or psychosis. It's really interesting. Most of the time it takes the form of this blotchy blackness that's projected over the environment around you, kind of like a mold spreading over everything. Flashbacks throughout the game talk about Senua's village being killed off by a plague of some description, and Senua's guilt around that, feeling that it was her darkness that had been brought with her and contaminated everyone else, which makes that mold comparison even more poignant. Alongside the ebb and flow of the darkness, there are also some auditory clues, things like screams slowly rising from hell and hypersensitivity to the sounds around you in the environment, and the voices in Senua's head panicking and wondering what's going on and giving conflicting information. It's really, really overwhelming. The sound design in this game is phenomenal, but also terrifying. It instills genuine fear in me throughout many parts of the game. The visual and auditory elements of Hellblade coming together makes it one of the most breathtaking and immersive games I've ever played, and that is doubly accentuated by the brilliant performances from all of the actors. Fun fact, Melina Juergens, who plays Senua, not an actress. She's an editor, but acted as a stand-in while they were testing all the motion capture stuff, and then they were like, hey, you're doing a good job. Do you want to just keep doing this? That's just a weird bit of trivia, but to me, I think that makes her performance even more impressive. Throughout my entire experience with Hellblade, it was pretty overwhelming. And I think that's what Ninja Theory intended. In the times when Senua's darkness would rise up and overwhelm her, the stimulus, the voices, the screams, the spinning world, the pulsing blackness, it felt like I was experiencing panic attacks again. Not to the same degree that I used to. There was no point where Hellblade made me cry under my desk, but intensely enough that it brought up a lot of those feelings, and I had to put the game down a couple of times and take a break before I felt okay enough to continue playing. There are so many moments throughout this game that strike such an intense emotional chord that I find it kind of scary. That emotional intensity, as insanely exhausting and overwhelming as it may be, is also why I think so highly of this game. It's a frankly real mirror to look into, and that's not the most important part. To me, the most important part is that it's an incredibly powerful piece of work for those who want to understand that worldview, that those that haven't dealt with mental illness in any way and want to understand better. Any piece of art that provides the audience with a better understanding of a worldview that they themselves don't hold or haven't experienced is a valuable piece of art. And for me, Hellblade is one of the best examples of understanding the world of mental illness. Hey, thanks for watching. This is a bit of a weird one to make. I know it's a lot heavier than my usual content, but it was far too compelling of an experience for me to not talk about it. If you want to get a copy of Hellblade for yourself so you can play through and experience what I did, or experience something completely different, because we all get different things out of the media we consume, make sure that you're subscribed, that's the red button down there, and drop a comment, and I will be drawing the winner on August 4th. If you want to listen to me make my way through my backlog, check out this playlist here, which is all my backlog bust videos. And if you need something more lighthearted, check out this playlist here. Bye!